Good morning. This will be our final installment to deal with anxiety. I know you may feel like we've been belaboring it. I hope not. But I want to conclude with this underlying piece that sits there with anxiety, which is fear, right? That's part of what gives birth to anxiety. We start perseverating and looking internally. We want to change our situation because we're having fear. I mentioned in a previous thought for the week that sometimes we have like a second fear. We have a fear about our fears. One of the things that anxiety brings to us that actually is a positive about it is that it sort of exposes us. It's uncomfortable. And what it exposes is the fissures at times, the cracks in our faith. And I think that the fissures and cracks in our faith become the kind of thing that we need to be able to address and we need to be able to look at. The opposite of fear. What is the opposite of fear? I think some people think the opposite of fear is peace, or the opposite of fear is courage. The opposite of fear is boldness. But I would submit to you that the opposite of fear is faith. Faith is the opposite. That when we swing the pendulum over into fear, it's because we're lacking the capacity to trust. And that our job then is to look at that and ask why that's the case and how we can begin to address those fears in a way where words of faith begin to replace the words of fear. So let me give you a few scriptures, and I'm going to come back and share with you a practical thing that you can do. In Mark 5:36, this is Jesus addressing the ruler of the synagogue who wants his daughter to be healed. He, overhearing what they said, those who were like outside the bedchamber there, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." His address to the ruler of the synagogue is, don't give in to hearing people around you and cave to the fear that you've lost your daughter. Only believe. You know, those words resonate with people. People who are afraid of losing someone. People who are afraid of someone walking away from the faith that they love. People who are afraid of the future, afraid of the unknowns, especially as it relates to others. I think that idea there of don't fear but only believe speaks directly to that. How is it that you address your fears of another safety? You're sending your kids off on a missions trip. Your fears of, well, my child has walked away from the faith. What happens next? Your fears of just the way the world is today and what that means for people that you love. I see in Jesus' words a solution that is at one moment simple but very difficult. Only believe. It's interesting to me that he says that. It's as though he isolates on it, right? It says there's one way you can solve this. Faith, believe, trust. Now, anxiety exposes that I'm trusting myself because I think by thinking more about my problem, I'm going to solve my problem, when the exact opposite is true. All I'm doing is feeding the fear and stirring myself up in various ways. The Bible speaks to this in different ways. The psalmist in Psalm 56, verse 3 says, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you." So I'm afraid, I'll put my trust in you. He says in the next verse, verse 4, "In God, whose word I praise, in God I trust. I shall not be afraid. What can flesh do to me?" Listen, Jeremiah used to say, "The man of God is immortal until the day God is through with him." So that means that you can happen to your life, since he has written every day before one of them came to be, with a kind of boldness and happen to it. In that way, when you get caught in the warp of anxiety, you've got to step up and remind yourself that exposing of your lack of faith needs to draw you to self-reflection so that you can say, wait a minute, that's not the kind of person I want to be. Instead, I want to turn myself outward and I want to trust the Lord. I want to get away from trusting myself. I'm a poor receptacle for my own faith. Hebrews 13:6. So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? Right? That's right out of that psalm we just read. It's this idea of what can flesh do to me? What do I have to fear? I can say the Lord is my helper. I'm not alone in this, and I don't have to act like I'm alone in it. Anxiety is when I act like I'm alone in something. I act like I have to figure it out all myself. Final passage, famous passage, Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. That's what happens in anxiety. You're leaning upon your own capacities, and what you're finding is you're spinning your wheels because you can't get any traction. Faith is like that board that goes under the back wheel that allows you then to finally get traction out of the mud, right? You gotta have trust in the Lord, leaning upon his sovereign care. In all your ways, verse 6 says, acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. So the antithesis of anxiety is the acknowledgement of the sovereign care of God, and that he loves you, that he sees you in your situation, and that you can trust him and you can lean into him, that you can believe him. It's not the power of positive thinking. It's the trust in a person. It's the resting like a child who doesn't know fully what their father or mother will do, but they just know that being in their mother's arms, being in their father's arms is safer than the alternative, and so they trust. So let me give you a practical exercise. You're struggling with anxiety, you're having fear. And with that, you could texturize probably sentences, even things that you go through your head. What I want to encourage you to do is write those down. Take a sheet of paper, split it down the middle, and on one side write fear at the top, and on the other side write faith. Write down what those are. I'm afraid that I'm going to die. I'm afraid that I'm going to lose this person. I'm afraid that I'm going to go crazy. I have fear over the loss of this in my life, or fear over this health issue emerging, or fear over this relationship falling apart, or I feel insecure about this. You just list them. What are those fears? Then I want you to go over to the other side. I want you to objectify these. And what I mean by that is get them out from you. This is why it's a good practice. You got to get it out of your head on paper. Get it out of your head on paper. Here they are. And then I want you to go to the other side. And I want you to write a corresponding word of faith. What would it mean to take this thing, right, and to then turn it to faith? A fear that I'm going to die. Wait a minute. I am the Lord's, and he has authored my life, and I will lean into him. I'm a fear of this relationship falling apart. The Lord is my trust. He is my rock on whom I stand. I will lean into him. Think about specific words of faith that match the words of fear, and then just get it all out in front of you and ask yourself this question. Why do you look and think about only one side of the ledger? And which side is more true? See, what you want to do is reorient your life to the practice of habituating words of faith over words of fear, because words of faith map on to the reality that God is sovereign. Words of fear keep you in a context of a stirred up heart that perseverates on the self. And then really your own story ends up sort of resolving on itself. And when your story is disconnected from God's grand story, probably anxiety is about what you're going to get. So I want to encourage you, words of faith, words over words of fear. And let that be something that you kind of practice and begin to think about in your own life as you lean not on your own understanding. And in all your ways you acknowledge him, and he'll make your path straight. May the Lord bless you, and may he give you a great victory over an anxious heart. Take care.